Welcome to the Books and Beer Book Club, coming to you from Cercis Brewing Company in Columbus, Wisconsin. We're a different kind of book club, only reading books by authors who can visit us in person or via Zoom for the discussion. We've been going strong since 2015, meeting nearly every month. We're now making these fun and informative discussions available to you on video. I'm your host, Valerie Beal. I'm an author myself, and I enjoy interviewing our guest authors and facilitating the questions from our readers both in person and on Zoom. We hope you enjoy this replay. To join us live, please check out our schedule on our Facebook page at Books and Beer Columbus.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is so awesome to have such a good crowd tonight. My name is Valerie Beal. I'm a local author. Just a little history because I see so many new faces tonight, and I hope, I'm sure you're here because Nick wrote such a wonderful book. But also, I hope you're maybe from the area and you keep coming back because it's really nice to see such a great crowd. So we started, just a little history, and then I'll talk about how we work a little bit. We started in 2015 on this same block in a pub called Hydro Street. And then we moved over to Black Kettle. We've been on the same block like the whole time, but we've been here for quite a few years now. And then we pivoted a little bit during the pandemic, and we did some events just, via Zoom. And now we have kept Zoom going just because it's nice to have people, able to come in this way. Once in a while, we'll have an author Zoom in, but we do like to have the authors come in person.
It's much more fun in person.
It is.
For the authors anyway.
For everyone. So we record this, and later on, there'll be a replay. I put that up on YouTube, the replay. So we have a really good crowd for everybody on Zoom tonight. I pivot so you could see who all is here, but we have a wonky HDMI cord that every time I do pivot, then I lose and I have to start over. It's really not a fun tech moment. So we will avoid that.
You're out of luck.
Yeah.
Is the short version of that.
So basically this is a casual Q&A. How many people have read the book? Books.
Yeah.
The books.
How many people have read more than one?
Ooh.
Okay, more than two? More than three?
Okay, there's lots of hands going up for everyone on Zoom, just so you know.
More than four?
All the books?
More than
sorry, no.
Wow.
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I jumped the gun. Did you want to know?
I thought I was working up to it. But apparently it wasn't very interesting.
I'm sorry.
sorry.
I start out, I usually start out with some of the questions, and I was joking, that's like the only time I get to use my broadcast news degree. My parents are so proud. Then please jump in with questions. And on Zoom, if you would like to, you can ask questions in the chat, and I'm going to see what we've got there. Chris Norberry, another thriller writer from Minnesota, says that he has just read The Price You Pay. Outstanding, he says. There we go. So if I'm not paying attention to Chris and Maggie on Zoom, unmute if you have a question.
Wave your hands.
That works too. We'll
Jazz
see.
hand.
If I don't see you, everybody else will see you back here and let me know. So so jump in with questions. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
The very long journey here from
so
Milwaukee.
It was so far. Well, and thanks to everybody for coming out, because I know there are many things to do now in the evening. So thanks for coming out to talk about books and all that kind of stuff with us. So thank you.
It's my favorite thing to talk about.
Always.
Books. Technically, we were reading The Price You Pay for this discussion, even though we're starting pretty late in the series.
It's all right. The goal is that we can read them as you find them. There is a character arc that it sort of moves very slowly from book to book.
Mm-hmm.
But the goal for me as an author is that you, if you find something, I want people to be able to pick up the one that they have in their hand and start there. Again, if you are an absolute, you have to read stuff in order, you can go all the way back to the Drifter. But that's not, I've written them with the intention that you can pick them up in whatever order that you happen to land on.
Yes, and that worked because I have not read the other books, but I will be going back to read them. We had dinner together, and I apologize for not having read any of these books before. And I don't know how that happened because they're amazing.
Thank
and
you.
You're a Wisconsin author, and I should have found your stories much sooner than I did. But you did write that way. And I was talking to your publicist, was like, okay, can we do this? Is this, a standalone? And you don't, that is a skill in itself, right? If you've got a series of books that you can pick up one further in the series and you're not lost, but you're also not like overburdened with like 10 pages of backstory.
Oh, yeah.
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 That's kind of an important skill.
Well, it's interesting because it's something I calibrate pretty closely because I don't want you to be loaded down with everything that's happened before. I will, if if this is your 8th Peter Ash book, you will notice a few little Easter eggs that I throw in. There'll be a mention of their trip to Nebraska. There'll be a mention of somebody that they met in a previous book, or but that's not I don't want you to sort of have a whole chapter full of stuff that you have to chew your way through if you are someone who's been reading all along.
Right. Well, we've all read series like that where you go, oh, don't need the first chapter.
Or the first 3, or no, I don't.
Right. I am curious because I didn't know anything much about like your bio, your backstory, how you have a master's, MFA.
Right.
Right. So you were always a writer? Did you feel like you were always a writer?
I felt like I was always a writer. I was in high school. I started as a freshman on the student newspaper, and I'm not a sports guy, and freshmen write sports, so I was bad at that. The sophomores write news, and I'm not a facts person, and so I was bad at that. And by my junior year, they had me on features, so I was doing goofy stuff like interviewing not the actor in the school play, but the character that the actor was playing in the school play to help you get a sense of what the play was like. Oh. And then by my senior year, I became the editor, and I could assign myself any story I wanted. So I wrote an 8-part soap opera featuring all my friends and making fun of all my enemies. And that was the start of it. People would stop me in the hall and say, oh, that was funny, or oh, I like what you did there. And sort of realizing that there's an audience piece to this. That sort of sold me. And I'd worked my way through all of the English classes that were available. So I took a creative writing class at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee when I was a senior in high school.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And so I got to sort of dive into that even more. And so I was a creative writing and American culture major at Michigan. And it was always what I wanted to do, but I also knew that it was hard to make a living at.
Right.
And I wanted some stuff to write about. And I'd always been somebody who liked to do stuff with his hands. I was always the repair person as a kid at home. My dad was busy, and he would say, hey, would you go do this thing? And sure, I'll figure that out. So I became a carpenter. And then after that, I was a general contractor. So repairing old houses, renovating old houses. And then I became a freelance building inspector. So you hire a guy like me when you buy a house to tell you everything that's wrong with it. And each all of that was sort of all connected. And I never really thought about this, but when my first book got published, I could actually talk to strangers. I'm an introvert. You wouldn't notice that today, but as a home inspector, I would meet 20 new people in the course of a day. And that skill of being able to really, you're an educator, how does the furnace work? How do you, what do you need to think about? Got me, the skills to be able to do this kind of stuff, which no writer thinks is part of their job description, to do this piece, right? So most writers want to be, with their head in their notebook, and telling a story, creating characters, all that stuff. And then our publisher says, yes, now you need to help people find these stories. And so, but I didn't have any of those. I didn't think I had any of those skills. But it's a weird career path.
Clearly you do have those skills.
Well, I've also been doing this now for, 9 years.
Right.
So you also learn on the go. I was talking to a friend of mine, Erica Ruth Neubauer. Do you guys read Erica Ruth Neubauer? She's a Milwaukee Now Madison author. She writes historical mysteries. The first one is called Murder at the Mina House. And she's a wonderful writer, sort of funny. These books are very fast. They're graceful. But she does not like this stuff. But it is just sort of, you have to get good at it. You have to, because it is part of, if you want to, be able to pay your mortgage, you have to be able to do this stuff. So it's the dirty secret.
So I'm curious if the first Peter Ash book, The Drifter, was the first book you ever wrote.
No, I wrote 3 books I couldn't get published. I quit. I decided I was done. I was never going to be a writer. And
did you keep them?
Yeah, oh no, there's a reason they didn't get published.
Okay.
There's a very real reason they didn't get published. And so the story of the third one kind of broke my heart. I had an editor who was interested, and she said, take 3 months and make these revisions and get it back to me. Sort of like an audition. How easy are you to work with as an
So
author?
it was like a revise and resubmit,
Yes,
they call that.
yes.
Yeah.
And I worked away at making these changes, but between the time when I had that conversation with her and I got the book back to her, Lehman Brothers had failed, the giant the crash had happened. Nobody in publishing was buying anything that from somebody they didn't know, some schmo out of Wisconsin. And so it was sort of like, okay, that's the end. And I took a sledgehammer to my kitchen. Sledgehammer therapy is important in my life. But my wife noticed something, and she said, you're kind of a pain in the ass when you don't have a book project you're working on. And so I just started writing about the things that were going on in my head at the time. And I can talk about all of that, sort of where that first book came from, but with no expectation that anybody else would ever read it. I just wrote the book I wanted to read.
That's very freeing.
It's very, very freeing.
Yes. Yes. I cannot remember where I was. I was with other authors and we were having a discussion, and it was something about like, aren't you a nicer person when you have a writing project?
Oh yeah.
And everyone's like,
absolutely.
yeah, just to ask my spouse kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like that resonates.
Yeah, I just sent the last book, the new book, off to my editor on Friday. And so I'm a little jangly. I don't really have like I'm just waiting to hear back. And I don't really have any sense of how good it may or may not be because I've been staring at it for a year. And so I'm just kind of walking around the house, and Margaret's like, would you just go do something? So I'm changing out the sub panel in my basement. That's my tomorrow project, is to just because I need something to do.
Does she have a list though? Like for when you finish the
Oh,
book?
yeah.
Be like the honey-do list?
Well,
when
it's a list for always, but it only gets done when I finish the book.
So she's probably like, yay.
Yes.
All right. So tell us about Peter Ash and tell us about your inspiration for this character and how this came to be.
So Peter Ash is a Marine Corps veteran who came back from his wars in Iraq and Afghanistan with what he calls his only souvenir, which is post-traumatic stress that takes the form of claustrophobia. And he can only, in that first book especially, he can only be inside for 15 or 20 minutes before the white static, which is what he calls his post-traumatic stress, starts to sort of climb up his spine and make him a little crazy. I was never in the military, but I had clients who, after the surge, were coming home from the war, and as a home inspector, I'm spending 3 or 4 hours with somebody, and they're never going to see me again, right? And, they might hire me for the next time they buy a house in 7 years or 10 years or however long it is.
Right.
And one of the weird things about me, frankly, is that people tell me things in line at the grocery store or waiting at the airport. I was in a car. I was going to talk at a veterans center in Connecticut about a month ago, and the woman who was driving me from the hotel to the event told me all about her alcoholism in her younger years and her recovery and how she founded this business. And I asked, I think, 1 or 2 questions. Something about, I'm interested. I'm genuinely interested in people, and I think that's part of it. But it's my face, or I don't know what it is. But so people tell me stuff. And so the other thing about talking with veterans is that when you come home from war, you have this collection of experiences that you're not always all that enthusiastic about. Sometimes you don't want those memories. Sometimes you're ashamed of those memories. So it's hard to talk to other people about that when you've had that experience. So your family, your spouse, your kids, your parents, your buddies from high school or college, you don't necessarily want to load that down on them, right? You don't want to share that with them. They don't have a frame of reference. The people you served with you have a relationship that's really based on being dependable and reliable and strong and capable. And so it's hard to talk about painful experiences with that community as well. Vietnam vets have an especially hard time with this because of what it was like when they came home from war. But so you're a vet. You've just come home from the surge in Iraq, and you had a fairly hellacious time. Urban warfare is really a challenge for pretty much everybody. And you can't talk to your parents or your friends, and you can't talk to your service buddies. But then there's this guy who shows up and tells you everything that's wrong with your house. And by the end, we're down in the basement looking at the furnace and the foundation. And, mom and dad are upstairs with your spouse measuring for the curtains or where's the couch going to go. And I say something, I see an Army shirt, right? Or a Marine Corps tattoo. And I say, so you're in the Army. And so we would have this conversation. And I am, I never served, and I was interested in the war. I'm interested in sort of what goes on in the world, but I never, to my shame, really thought about what it was like to come home from war. Mm-hmm. And I got a really illuminating view of that from those conversations. And that after that, I sort of fell down a rabbit hole, and I started reading about post-traumatic stress, and there are a bunch of really good books about sort of that experience if you're interested. And at the same time, I was inspecting houses that had been foreclosed on. So I would show up often when the sheriffs were just finished carrying all of the stuff out, because in Milwaukee County, what happens is you get foreclosed on. If you haven't moved yourself out, the sheriffs come and they move you out and they stack your stuff along the curb, and it's up to you to figure it out. And so I would walk past the pile of stuff on the curb with usually an investor, right? Somebody who was buying a house to rent.
Yep.
And at the same time, reading about the crash and reading about the people who had done very well, wrecking the economy and ruining many people's financial lives. And so that's where that first book came from. That's where The Drifter came from, was those conversations with veterans and thinking about sort of the things that were going on in my life. And I never, again, thought that book would be published, but Margaret, my lovely wife, said, you either need to stop talking about this book or you need to put it in the mail. So I already had an agent, and so I sent it to her, and she got back to me in 2 days and said, so I hope you still think I'm your agent, because this is good and we can sell this. And 3 weeks later, I had a 2-book deal from Putnam. So it was a very
That's awesome.
My friend,
Yes.
I have a friend who refers to that as the 25-year overnight success story.
Right.
Yeah.
Because people will focus on that book as their first book,
Right.
when the journey was much longer.
Well,
than
it's a hard thing to do, right?
Yes.
It takes
Yes.
a long time to learn how to do this. And I always sort of was embarrassed that it took me, to my 4th book. But I now know people who wrote 9 books and the 10th got published. They wrote 12 books and the 13th got published. So this is a relatively normal story. And so if there are writers in this group, keep at it.
There are a few.
Yeah, keep at it. It's a hard thing to do. So it's not you, it's all of us that have trouble with this.
So you've had a good relationship with Putnam, or at least it appears you have had a good relationship with Putnam, as they have published all of your books. Do you typically get the contracts in 2-book deals? Or
Yeah,
how does that work?
it was 1 and 2, and then it was 3 and 4,
Mhm.
and then it was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Okay.
So the price you pay is book 8 in the series. What I've written next will be the 9th book in my contract.
Right. But not in the series.
Right.
It's too soon to ask. You just finished the 9th. It would be mean to ask, will there be a 9th Peter Ash?
I hope there will be a 9th Peter Ash. So on the book I just sent in was my first sort of non-Peter Ash book. And it's set in the Driftless region. And I'm trying to sort of do all the things I can't do with Peter Ash. So it's about somebody who has grown up in the same place and is surrounded by family and people he's known all his life. And it's still a thriller. It's still sort of as Peter Ash readers, you will recognize sort of this kind of story, right? The goal is that I don't alienate all of my faithful readers, right? But one of the interesting things about writing something that's very different from I wrote 8 Peter Ash novels is realizing how much I love those characters and how much I love writing those books and how much I miss them. I haven't, talked to them, right, for a year. So it's yeah, I will keep writing Peter Ash as long as they will let me.
You had a fairly faithful publishing schedule of January
Right.
every year, and then we've had a little gap. And is that because you shifted to the standalone?
No, sort of the recipe for publishers is to write a book a year. And the idea is that you have something in the marketplace on a regular basis, sort of the businessy piece. And that readers, you can build especially if you're writing a series, you can build your series relatively quickly. And so my first 4 books, I was on time early.
Mm-hmm.
The 5th book, I turned 50, which was a traumatic year. I was in a really bad mountain bike accident, tore up my shoulder. It was my son's last year in high school. He moved up to England to go to college, and he seemed like he'd never come back, and he still lives there today. And there are a couple of other things. It was a challenging year, and I had a book that I thought would be easy that turned out to be anything but.
Mm-hmm.
That was my son and I went to Iceland for a backpacking trip, and in the airport on the way home, the whole book sort of showed up in my head, and I had 20 minutes where it was like clear as a bell. And I scribbled notes as fast as I could, and then it was gone. And I thought, I know this whole book, right? And so I thought I would write from this, my pages of scribbled notes, which are basically indecipherable. But I was trying to work in a different way, and it took me 8 months longer than anticipated. And so I've been sort of trying to claw back time ever since. Mm-hmm. Because it's not polite. I'm from Wisconsin, right? It's not polite to be late. And it also makes it harder for them to do their job if I'm not on time.
Yeah, because there's schedules.
Yes. But then I was for my 8th book, they said I could write something different, right? I would write a standalone, and then I was 2 months into that, and they said, actually, no, we'd like another Peter Ash. And I jumped right into this next book, which is a Lewis book, which is something readers have been asking me for since the very beginning. But I think I jumped into it too quickly. I wrote for 5 months, and I could never really I started out writing about sort of how Lewis got started as a heister. And so Lewis's point of view in the past, and I could never get it out of that past. I couldn't find a way to turn this into a regular book. And so I just stopped, and I set it aside, and I started something else, and that something else became The Price You Pay. But so again, I lost more time.
But do you think that the work that you did on Lewis's backstory helped you write number 8?
I don't know. If you're interested in the Lewis backstory, it's actually it's a novella now that you can buy. Mystery Tribune is a great both electronically published and in print mystery quarterly. So it's called The Cleveland Job, and you can find it. Just Google Mystery Tribune number 21. You can buy it on Amazon electronically. You can buy it on, if you're a Nook reader, you can buy it from Barnes and Nobles electronically, or you can buy it in print from Mystery Tribune. So just Google them there. It's mysterytribune.com, number 21. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I always sort of knew Lewis's backstory.
Right. And but when you talk to authors, they will know. I mean, they have that all.
Right.
Yeah.
The hardest part about writing The Price You Pay, I think, was this disconnect between sort of Lewis as we have known him, right? Who is Peter's best friend, and we know him as a former career criminal and a good person, right? He basically got out of the business because he reconnected with his high school sweetheart, right? Dinah. So that's all what happens in that first book. If you haven't read it, I'm sorry. But so that's how Peter and Lewis become friends, and that's how that's sort of the basis of that relationship. But Lewis's past, I started sort of doing the numbers, right? If Lewis was in the stealing from high level drug dealers business for 10 years, And he and his crew did 10 jobs a year. And on every job, let's say 5 people get killed, right? That's 500 people, right? So this is not, he's not a dilettante, right? This is systematic, right? And so I had to find a way to reconcile those two and to both show kind of who Lewis is today and how he feels about what he used to do. And I had to give him a really good reason to do what he used to do. So you get what Lewis's childhood was like in this book. You get a lot more of him, which was a lot of fun to do. But I had to figure that was the hardest piece to figure out, because I didn't want someone who's basically a mass murderer to just like, that's not, I mean, these books they're supposed to be realistic. I mean, a lot of stuff happens that doesn't happen in real life, but you want the emotional content to feel real. And so I had to find a way to sort of make that all work.
I mean, your characters are fabulous, and there's so many things I could say about them, but in this book in particular, Teddy, I mean, it's all his fault. So spoilers, it's all Teddy's fault. I mean, just the nuances of that personality, and having to think through, him having had the traumatic head injury, and what he would be like. He was fun. I mean, we just didn't really know what he was going to do in every scene.
Well, you always want someone who's kind of a wild card, right? Yeah. And especially as you move a series forward, right? The goal is to keep surprising readers, and the goal is to have it still feel new, both to me as a writer, because I spend 1,500 hours on every one of these books at least, and for readers who will spend 6 hours reading the book. I want it to be surprising, and I want you to learn something new about the characters, even though you know them. I want you to just know them a little bit better. And the beauty of the way that I sort of accidentally designed this series, which is Peter moves from place to place. There are really only 3, maybe 4 recurring characters, depending on how much Dinah is in the book, right? It's Peter and Lewis and June. So there's a lot of room for adding those secondary characters. That's one of the things I like the most about these books, is getting to these characters just sort of show up. Like, I didn't plan what Teddy would be like. Like, I knew he was living in the middle of nowhere, and I knew he was a former heister, and I sort of knew that they didn't used to really like him. He was sort of someone they had to use sometimes.
Was this his first appearance?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So
yes.
Because I'm jumping into book 8.
No,
so I thought maybe he had made previous.
No, Nino and Ray are in the first book.
Okay.
Right. But this is our first meeting with Teddy.
Gotcha.
But Teddy just sort of showed up in his own quirky way. And I guess that says something about me.
No, he's great. He's wonderful. As I began the story, I realized I was in the hands of a master storyteller when you weren't afraid to kill people, like, fairly quickly. You'd kill people up.
Well, this book is quite a bit more violent than most. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
There were times when the path many writers would have taken would have allowed certain people to survive. For instance, in the beginning, the speech therapist who comes along, and she was being set up to get murdered anyway that night, but a stray bullet does her in, and he was it Lewis, I forget which one, tells her to hide in the bathtub.
Oh, Peter, tells her to hide in the bathtub.
Well, it wasn't a cast iron bathtub.
Yeah, no.
So that didn't work so well. Then the other one was really all Teddy, and it was the hacker dude.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't expect that one. I
got a lot of pushback about both of those.
Did you? Because I thought they were brilliant.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, so the concern, right? So there's this whole thing, and if you read about kind of movies and television and all, you'll understand this stuff too. But there's whole, like, how likable is the character, right? So how, like, do we still like Teddy even though he drops a guy out a window? Like, why did he do it? Like, what's the reasoning?
He did it for loyalty,
right,
and protection.
Right. But so that required a fair amount of finesse, right? Yes. My first time, he just did it for fun. He did it because he didn't like the guy and he'd hurt him, and he was just done. He was just like,
Well, I mean, there was that too, because the guy was
Yes.
pretty
Yes.
vicious as
Yeah.
well, so.
but the speech therapist, this Leanne.
You know, I don't
Sorry,
even remember
it's been
her.
a while.
Okay,
Um,
good, somebody's.
It was, well, does she have to die? And it's, you need to know early on what kind of book this is going to be. This is
Yes.
going to be a book where people who don't deserve to die will die.
Mhm.
And it's, yes, she would have died anyway, but it really is Peter and Lewis's fault.
Yes.
In a way. And I wanted the reader to feel how Peter and Lewis were feeling about that. And it's also a great engine to propel them forward.
Right. And it does give us the insight into their character if we say, for instance, are coming to this book like cold from
Right.
not reading the other books. So we know about them. They feel bad
Right.
about it.
Right.
Like this shouldn't have really happened, but now here we are. And yeah, those, I don't know. I just thought that was funny, but I was just trying to picture that whole scene in that apartment. How many floors up were they?
22. 26?
That's Heather. That's Heather. She's
You're paying attention, and it's been a while
Yeah.
for me. I appreciate it.
But I can see how you would miss these characters after spending so much time with them, over the course of how many books, then to shift to writing something different. They're fun. They're fun to write, aren't they?
They are fun, and there's the interplay between them. I mean,
Yeah.
I have more female readers than male readers, which is unusual for
That is
this
interesting.
kind of a book.
Yeah.
My readership. So the typical readership for a book like this is 60 and older male.
Okay.
And my readership is almost uniform across sort of the 4 age demographics, with more women than men, again, across the demographics. And I think it's because of character, and it's because of those relationships.
Yes.
And that's, and those male relationships, I think, is what guys like, because exploring that piece of it is a lot of fun for me, and I'm interested.
Mhm. I even have the note here. You write strong women. These women aren't, wimpy, whiny, crying in the background. Well, they're more pissed off than anything at Lewis and Peter. And I mean, they bring something to the table, and they're partners, and they're doing things that are, vital to the story and moving the storyline along in their own way. They're not just always adjacent to the guy,
Right.
I thought that was fun. I just think that and the way you write, like the conversations between them, it's fun.
Well, good.
It's good.
Good.
It's good banter. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I have been surrounded by strong women my whole life. Both my grandmothers, in their own way. My mom, on my mom's side, the joke was that by the end she got all her calories from scotch and chocolate, which I think was close to true. My mom at work was known as the Hammer at her job. She was in fundraising.
Oh,
Yes.
yes.
My sister is a fairly ferocious soul. My friends growing up were all pretty tough broads. Can I say that to the
You call me a broad, Nick.
My friend Cindy here, who I've known since 7th grade.
Cindy had been the director here of the Columbus Public Library, so it was real fun to have her come back in tonight. So Chris, who also writes suspense thrillers, says, I understand about killing off so many characters and getting pushback. I killed off at least 3 characters in my first book. The readers really liked, and I got lots of flack for it. Never expected that. But do you agree sometimes that the character has to die to make the story work better and have more impact?
I do. I mean, again, I'm writing crime thrillers, right? So and one of the things I'm interested in is violence. We as a society have a certain relationship with violence. You can have somebody beheaded in a PG movie, but you can't have 2 people having sex, right? So we have a definite relationship with violence, and that's one of the things that I'm interested in. And so it's a part of everything I write. I have yet to. I don't have enough recurring characters. I haven't been through. Kent Kruger ended up killing. I can't remember the character, but ended up killing somebody off, and there was all of this backlash.
Oh,
and
no.
This is William Kent Kruger, right? Who is one of the most beloved authors in America, right? And he did it because he needed to move the character forward. And so, I can't imagine ever killing June or killing Lewis.
Yes, please don't.
Because it's the core, right?
Well,
But everybody else is, up for grabs. And the goal is that you really fear for them, right? I don't want you to feel like they're safe. Nobody is safe.
Well, and then the way that you ended this book, I mean, we didn't know for sure what was going down because they're all living together and I'm waiting and I'm like, oh, he didn't. Did he kill? No, no.
But I gotten a lot of feedback online about
Mhm.
that, about sort of how that played out.
Well, and it's hard. I mean, that's tricky to write too, to keep that level of suspense up for
Yes.
long enough
Yes.
too. I always read as a writer myself, I always read like epigraphs. You have the quote from Mike Tyson. Do you guys read that in the beginning? The quotes that authors put in the beginning of the books? Yeah, right. Of course. So this one I thought was fitting. And I have not gone back to see what your other ones are, which I will do, but everyone has a plan until he gets punched in the mouth. That was the Mike Tyson quote. And I was like, that should have tipped us off as to what kind of book we were going to read.
I think so.
But also then, as a writer, this was very fun to read. So in your acknowledgments, you talk about probably having experienced this once or twice before that people will nitpick about certain things
Yes.
and that for, fiction and expediency, you take some liberties
Right.
with the truth. The fact that it takes more than 3 days to liquidate an investment account and, or takes, more
Right.
than the day, or
Yeah,
like it takes
yeah.
at least 3 days. And that just made me laugh because I thought for sure probably the kind of person who will complain about that should be the kind of person who reads the acknowledgements.
Well, but it is part of, I'm not, these are true crime books, right?
Yes.
This is,
Yes.
and so I get to make stuff up. That's part of the rules. But people get very invested in certain things and
Yes.
often they're actually not correct about things. So I had someone who,
Oh, yes. That
who,
happens.
there's especially people who are firearms enthusiasts get very focused on the firearms. And I am not a gun guy, so I have to really pay attention. And I've screwed a few
Mhm.
things up to my embarrassment. But there was somebody who's like, that shotgun doesn't exist. And so I just went to the manufacturer's website and I took the link and I posted it back in the the comments.
There it
Yes,
is.
yeah.
And there it
But
is.
we can't. It is such a massive undertaking.
The research.
Right.
Yes.
Well, and so I go through a book probably 8 times before it goes off to my editors.
Mhm.
I go through it. She goes through it once and I go through it another probably 2 or 3 times. She goes through it again and I make the last round of revisions. Then it goes to 2 different copy editors who look at it's not just are the quotes facing the right direction and did you use the right version of there, and there, but it's, does the timeline work?
Yes.
On this page, you said it was Tuesday. On that page, you said it was Thursday, but what happened to the day in between? So catching all the stupid stuff, right?
Are they fact
Yes.
checkers
Yes.
too?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And and then there are 2 cold readers, people who have never seen the book before, who read it to sort of get impressions and did anything jump out to them. So this has been through so many eyeballs and we still screw stuff up.
Oh,
it is just the nature of the beast.
It's hard. There's always something and you go back through it. When I had my audiobook narrator, narrate, and then I was listening back through, oh my goodness, that's when we caught some just typo things. And you're like, that should have been a comma. That should have been a
Well, so
period.
that's the best trick for writers is to read your own
Yes.
stuff aloud.
Yes.
And you will catch all of the dumb stuff
Yep.
if you read it aloud.
Yeah. My husband hates that part of the process because I'm somewhere in the house mumbling to myself, reading my story.
Oh yeah. Somebody told me that they actually now there's a narrate
Mhm.
function.
Yeah, it's on the
people,
computer.
yes, people have their computer read their book to them.
Yes.
And they can catch things that way as well.
And that is, but it's, and even just clunky dialogue
Yeah.
and stuff you can catch. You're like, oh, that doesn't sound
Yeah.
like how people would talk. Do we have questions that people want to ask?
Well, so if this was a screenplay or if this was a movie, it's really loud. With a lot of shooting.
Yes. Yes.
Do you ever, so is there talk about that?
The whole series has been optioned, and the option got renewed in January.
Ooh,
So there's a screenplay for the first episode, and it's out for sale, but it's been out for sale since November
As a series.
as a series. They never tell me anything. I every once in a while I reach out and say, hey, is there anything new? And I get a very polite here's what's happened. But
Yeah.
these are people who are a lot busier than I am. So I try not to bother them.
Well, I think about the popularity of shows like Jack Reacher and
Right.
things. I mean,
Yeah.
there's space for this story
Yes,
out there
yes.
this way.
Well, and there are
So-
more of these. It used to be there were really just a couple of successful versions of book series that came
Mhm.
to television. There was Longmire and there was Bosch, but now there are so many more. Like the new Reacher thing has done really well, and I thought it was a really faithful
Yes.
version.
Mhm.
Louise Penny, there's a really good first season. I don't know if they're going to be any more or not. Of the Inspector Gamache books called Three Pines, which was fantastic.
Right.
So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's cooking. But who knows? It's I'm
Right.
not. I'm
Well,
not.
and Hollywood is a different beast
Oh, yeah.
in terms of how things
Oh, yeah.
play out. So, yeah. Jim, did you have a question?
I got a couple of questions. You said you have an agent,
Yes,
does that help quite a bit?
it's pretty much required as far as I'm concerned.
No?
Because she has relationships with a whole bunch of different editors. So especially when you're first trying to sell your book, it really is about taste. So who is there that is actively looking for something like what you have written?
Right.
So it's the editor's job to both sort of figure out what it is you have written and to help shape what that pitch is, and to find the people who are most suited to that. The best way to find an agent is to think about what it is that you write, and to think about the writers who you love, who have written things that are somewhat similar to yours, that have really spoken to you. And go to the back of their book and they'll thank their agent. So that's how, figure out who the agents are of writers that you love, because some of that DNA will be in your work. And there are also, I don't know if there's a reverse directory for this. You might know this.
Yeah, and we can talk about it. What I use is Publishers Marketplace. I can find then who's reported deals on certain books. You can do it by topic, you can do it by keyword. And so if we're looking, say for your book in particular, we could do that based on Vietnam War memoirs, that kind of thing. So there was a question there.
Yeah,
So-
Lee Child gave you a great critique.
I've met him, although I didn't.
Pick his brain or your.
He's a super lovely guy.
Lee Child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That blurb came about in a really weird way. He was on a radio show promoting his book, his latest book, and the interviewer said, "So is there anything that you're reading that you particularly like?" And he, he's English, this chap Nick Petrie, this guy Nick Petrie wrote this book called The Drifter, and I really liked it. And so of course that got back to my publisher, and so we asked him if we could formalize that with a quote. But then this will tell you something about my wife Margaret. That book got nominated for an Edgar Award, which is sort of like the Oscars in the crime world.
Yes.
And
It's prestigious.
Yes, and there's a black tie event in New York. And so I was there with the other sort of first-time author nominees, and my wife Margaret is getting her name tag from the little table, and she realizes the guy next to her his name tag says Lee Child, and she says, "Hi, I'm Margaret Petrie, and my husband is Nick Petrie, and wouldn't you like to meet him?" So she drags Lee Child over to meet me. And to this day, when I see him at a conference, he always says, "How's Margaret?" So that is who he is to a T. He is a consummate gentleman, crazy smart guy.
And then he remembers her to this day.
Yes. Well, it was pretty memorable. What?
Strong women, you said?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I neglected to mention my wife. Yeah.
So I'm going to shift to the question here because it's related. So Chris asks, the price you pay made me think about Lee Child's work and Dennis, is it Lehane?
Yeah.
Lehane? Have you read any of their books, and did they influence your storytelling techniques or construction?
I have read all of their books. Those are both authors who are influences on me. The comparison to Lee Child, I'm a huge fan of his. I think I've read everything of his at least twice. I'm a big rereader. And there are some sort of, I think, superficial comparisons. My character moves from place to place. So does Jack Reacher. My character is former military, so is Jack Reacher. But the characters themselves are very different. Peter is someone who is looking for a home. He is looking for relationships, whereas Reacher he just wants to go to the next place.
True.
Um,
Yes.
it's and the Reacher is also kind of a Superman, right? It's
Right.
hard to hurt him. He's pretty much invulnerable. He doesn't really feel bad about anything. But Peter's kind of a tortured guy. Peter, has this violence within him that finds its way out, and he's not always happy about it. He's not always proud of it. So again, I'm super flattered that by the comparison. I'm not sure it's all that apt, especially as my series moves forward. The other thing that Lee does that I think is really hard to do is that those books really are, you really can read those books in absolutely any order. The character does not evolve or change in any way. And I think that's really hard to do as a writer, to have this static character remain interesting and compelling, which he does, he has. I think that's a really neat trick, and I don't really know anybody who's done it that way.
Right. And that's very, very hard to do with your series arc,
Yeah.
to not
Yeah.
have the change in
Yeah.
the characters.
But Dennis Lehane, if you guys have not read Dennis Lehane, his early books are these Boston PI novels that are absolutely fantastic. The first one is called Darkness Take My Hand. And then he wrote a little book called Mystic River, which you may or may not have heard of and or seen the movie. And his latest is called Small Mercies. It came out last fall, and it's fantastic.
I haven't read that one yet.
So yeah, both of them are big influences on me for sure.
Go ahead. Did you question?
Do you know where the story is gonna go from the start, or do you do an outline, or do you just start typing and see where it takes you?
That's a great question.
The question for those online, if you couldn't hear, was about how he approaches his plotting. So
I am what is known in the trade as a pantser, which means I write by the seat of my pants. I do not. I don't plot as I go.
wait, is that the first time you all heard that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is a very inefficient way to work, because I'm often sort of 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. But I've tried to be an outliner, and it's no fun. It's boring. As soon as I'm done with the outline, I figure I'm done with the book. Like I've lost the interest.
Yes.
So these books are complicated stories sometimes, and I think I just I've read a lot, and I've taken apart a lot of books. One of the things that I did to learn how to write was I would take a book that I loved, and then I would read it again, and I would write what's called a beat line. So just sort of a chapter by chapter, what happens, whose point of view is it, how long is the chapter, and kind of what's the emotional piece in every chapter. And you can work your way through a book that way, and you learn a huge amount about how books are constructed. Some of it's really basic stuff, like how many chapters can you go between a point of view before you forget who that other character was.
Yes.
But just to see something sort of, you know what an exploded diagram is? If you ever taken apart an engine or an appliance, right? There's a diagram that is like all of the parts taken apart from each other.
Yes. Yes.
So it's sort of like an exploded diagram of a novel. And so I do that every year. I pick a book that I've loved, and I want to know how it works. And it works with short stories too. You can, the first time you read it, it's what happens. The second time you sort of try to, you know what happens. So you're reading for what are the characters doing? What are the, what's the emotional content? With a short story, you can read it 3 times pretty quickly. And then you really see all the gears.
And
You
with
see
the
all,
nuances.
you see the machinery.
Mhm.
But so I think that's part of that process, is why I can spin out these complicated plots sort of off the top of my head, because I have been thinking about this for a long, long time. And I'm just sort of feeling my way through, and sometimes I get stuck and I have to backtrack. Well, that was fun, but it's not the right thing. So I should do this instead. Does that answer your question at all? All right.
No, I think that's fascinating, because I would have made some assumptions that you were at least partially outlining, mainly because it's series writing. And when you write a series, then you get married to certain decisions you've made in the previous
Right.
books. But if you've got those all, in your head, like the decisions you've made that are finite, that you have to keep to, like, certain things that people have either you said about people's backstory,
Right.
or whatever, you got to keep that.
Yeah, but again, part of it's like I'm terrified of being bored, and so that's part of why this series is structured the way it is, with just a few recurring characters, because I don't want to have to keep track of all that stuff.
Right. It's a lot to keep track of otherwise.
Yeah, and I want the freedom to take these people any place I want, to do any kind of story that I want. I can do all kinds of different stuff. And I've done that deliberately because, I mean, I love Robert Parker's work, but I don't want to write 20 books set in one place with the same cast of characters, even the same bad guys in some of those books.
Well, and then people will say, you know, in the writing world, will say that being a pantser allows you to, like, the magic to happen. And that those aha moments and those really good writing days where you're like, oh, there we go.
Yeah.
That is the pivotal, you know, thing. Like,
Well, see, I think outliners get that too, but they do it, because the outline is not the map is not the territory, right? An outline isn't really static for a lot of outlines.
That's true. It's a guide.
Yeah.
It's a guide. So it depends on how you use it or how detailed it is.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. But then, you know, there's a lot of room when you're outlining something to how much can it, you know, that you get a lot more ahas in a shorter period of time if you're doing that relatively quickly.
It's true. It's true. Other questions?
I was gonna ask if your wife was the inspiration for June.
The question is whether his wife was the inspiration.
A
for
little
June.
bit, yeah. I mean, it's my wife, my sister. The amount of grief Peter gets from June is very autobiographical. Let me just put it that way. There's a scene in The Breaker where June wants Peter to shut up and she throws a pen at him and hits him in the forehead. And that has happened to me in the past.
Who did that? You're gonna tell? No.
Yeah.
And I like the way, you know, you drop little tidbits and, you know, that come back full circle, like Easter egg type things,
Sure.
where you're like, I knew that phone contract was going to be a problem.
Phone
The
contract?
cell phone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The family plan.
Oh, yeah.
I knew that was going to be a problem as they were running through all the cases, right? And they're going through Teddy's notes and they're like listing off, well, it could have been this job that's, you know, coming back. I was like, oh, I think I know who that is. I was like, but maybe not. See, you kept us guessing, but it's so much fun and that's hard to do. So I am fresh off of finishing my first murder mystery and that is tricky. I thought it was going to be easier.
Well, mysteries are a different form, right? So,
Yeah.
I write what somebody told me that I write a thriller with a mystery in the middle.
Yeah.
So you don't know who the bad guy is necessarily at the outset. You don't even know what the point of conflict is. But there is, so a thriller, you're trying to prevent something from happening.
True.
A mystery, you're trying to solve something that's already happening.
Right. So that is actually a really good description of your book, son, isn't it?
Right.
Like a mystery with thriller.
And again, it's not
or a thriller with a
necessarily-
mystery in the middle.
It's not something I necessarily did on purpose. It's just what I do. But mysteries are much more like a puzzle, I think, than a
Mhm.
thriller. I
Mhm.
think readers relate to mysteries in a different way because they are looking for clues. They are trying to put things together. So I think it's hard to write a pure mystery.
Like you say, you just sent your book off and, you know, you're so close to it and you're not sure now.
Right.
Because I mean, the chances of it not being really good are pretty slim. However,
No, there's
but as a writer, we always worry about that. And,
Oh, yeah.
and with like all these red herrings or these clues and, you know, you're trying to send people in different directions, whatever, with things. Sometimes you don't know if it works because you've just read over it so many times.
yes.
There's all that, like where you do need the fresh eyes on it.
Well,
So,
my agent says she always knows when the book is good because I'm the least positive about it.
oh,
When I complain the most about it. So I don't know if that's true or not, but
well,
I do complain about it a lot.
the process is always fun in the end.
I do a lot of travel. To me, it's important to go to the place, especially when you write a series that is set in lots of places,
Mm.
and a series in which place is kind of a character, right? So the book set in Memphis has a real different feel to it than the book set in Denver or the book set in Iceland, right? So setting, that's one of the things I like best is place. And if you lean into it, it becomes a whole other character. Going to Memphis, for example, for the fourth book, and it's weird little details. I mean, you can learn a lot of stuff online, but yeah, the ducks. But so there are all these tulip trees in Memphis, big flowering trees, enormous flowering trees. And we were there basically right after all the blossoms had fallen.
Oh, okay.
And they're rotting in the streets and in the gutter. And you can smell this sort of like fermented perfume.
It's like cloying. kind
Yeah,
of like,
yeah.
Yeah.
And so like, I mean, just it's like, oh, there's a metaphor for what Memphis is now, right? So Memphis is a lot like Detroit. Memphis is sort of a, in a way, kind of a fallen city surrounded by very prosperous suburbs. So you don't get that stuff unless you go there.
Right.
Denver, I didn't realize, I think of Denver as a mountain town. It's really a plain city
Mhm.
right at the edge of the mountains. And when you get there, all of the streets that go east and west, you can see the mountains. Like, and it feels like an old West town. And so that book's actually turned out to be kind of a Western. Down to, you know, the Winchester repeating rifle that Peter uses, right? So it's, I don't know, you get a lot going to visit someplace.
I think that's true. I think setting is actually is character, is like another character in the way it.
I agree with you, Norma. There is another school of thought on
Mhm.
this, right? So I have friends who write books that could take place anywhere,
Mhm.
right? They almost don't even describe what people look like because they want you to imagine it's your town. They want
Okay.
you to imagine that this character is like somebody you know, right? So then it looks, you're doing a lot of the work, bringing the reader does a lot of work coming to that. And that's that's a perfectly fine school of thought. That's just not what I'm interested in. I want something that's gonna suck me in completely and make my whole life disappear, and it's just me and my book on the couch. That's my ideal reading experience.
Yes. And you. So Maggie asked the question here. Does your book start with an idea or a concept or a new character, setting, or occurrence? Like basically what is your jumping off point for your story?
I've never used the word occurrence in this, but that's really I start with a circumstance is how I've talked
Okay.
about it. So like this book, I knew that this was going to be about Lewis's past.
Mhm.
And I knew I wanted to turn the tables because Lewis has been sort of the helper character. And when Peter gets in trouble, Lewis shows up to help him out. And I wanted to reverse that, right? So Lewis is in trouble and he asked Peter to come help. That was pretty much all I knew. I didn't know. I knew there was going to be a member of the old crew who was in trouble, but I wrote the whole scene going up there without realizing that Denny had written 14 notebooks full of everything he could remember about his criminal life and what part those would play.
Right.
Those just sort of showed up.
I think it can be different for different stories,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which thing like sets you on your path,
There's
sets
a
the story going.
There's a
So,
great line that I can't remember who said it, but I say it a lot. So I hope someone tells me who said it. That writing a novel is like creating a new mathematical equation.
Ah.
Right? If you're leaning too far into formula, readers are going to find out very quickly.
Mhm.
And they are going to object strenuously because
Mhm.
we want to be entertained and surprised, and so they all come from a different place.
Mhm.
It's a very strange process.
Yeah, I think that's the same for me. Like my stories all
Yeah.
started from different things.
Yeah.
It's not always the
Yeah.
same thing.
Well, so the question is, does it help if I
Yeah.
know the place that I am writing about? Like Milwaukee is easier for me to write about because I know it really well, but I also have to sort of decide which version of Milwaukee I'm writing about. So The Drifter, which is the first Milwaukee book, is about sort of the kind of the near kind of northeast side, which is sort of the poorest part of Milwaukee. The Breaker, and the only reason The Breaker is set in Milwaukee is because it was COVID and I wasn't going to travel anywhere. So I had to write I wrote a Milwaukee book. But that's about Milwaukee's South Side, which is sort of the manufacturing heart. You know, Milwaukee used to be the machine shop to the world. We have this long tradition of highly skilled craftsmen. And so I kind of wanted to lean into that piece about making stuff. So even those two Milwaukee books aren't really about the same version of Milwaukee. Sometimes it's really intimidating to write about a place that I don't know well because I really don't want. I've had the experience reading about a place that I know well that another author has written about and going, you have no idea what the hell you're talking about.
Well,
And I really don't
Yes.
want anybody to do that
Right.
with my stuff. And
well, it
so,
pulls you out of reading the story.
Well,
It
yes,
pulls you
yes,
out and you're
yes.
like, oh, that's not how that street works.
right,
You know,
right.
like-
You know, I pay a lot of attention to that stuff. And in general, I go to some place when I'm sort of midway through writing the book. So I already sort of know, you know, what some of the chase scenes and everything else. So I go drive them. Like, does this really work? Can you do what I want to do at this place in the,
Do you go that fast? Sorry.
always go that fast. And I
You get
hire
like-
somebody to come behind me shooting at me, just to make it feel real.
Just curious. Thank you so
Thank
much
you,
for
thank you.
coming in.
Thank you for coming out.
Appreciate it.
Excellent question, and thank you.
Yeah, this is fun.